Welcome to the Schuylkill County Historical Society. My name is Tom Dragalis. I have the privilege of serving as the Society's director, and you are really in for a treat this evening. Just want to give you a little bit of a setup of the program tonight because, we've been very fortunate here over the 114 plus years that the Society has been in existence that we really have the privilege of being the keepers of some of the most precious artifacts of the county. And I just want to give you a little bit of background about how this program came to be tonight so you have a real true appreciation of just how fortunate we are. Those of you who may have been here for other programs, I did mention this particular acquisition, but just to show you, right in front of here, about a year or so ago, we received a call from a woman by the name of Mary Jane Pelham. She's an older woman from up in the Boston area, was traveling through our part of the state on her way to Florida. And so she called the day before and said, would we be interested in receiving some letters from a Civil War soldier from Pottsville? And naturally said, certainly we would. So she stopped by, and what's left with this, I want to show you, are the transcribed copies of all the letters, and look at this, from her great-great-grand-uncle, Lieutenant William Clemens. These are transcribed, and this was done on a manual typewriter. Can you imagine the patience of the person who did this? And it was her, she did it back in the 70s. Of each of the letters that he had handwritten home to his parents and his sister, the first letter being dated April 18th, 1861, and the last one, I believe, is, let's get the exact date for you here, is July 8th, 1870. Imagine that. Now, to add to our enthusiasm, this is, by the way, is on display in our Civil War exhibit. If you haven't seen it, it's very, very nice, all authentic. We have, as recently as last week, been in contact with Mary Jane, and we are extremely pleased that her and her family have elected to gift to the Society for permanent preservation here at the Society the original handwritten letters. She brought them with them, and absolutely. Mary Jean, and that's one of the reasons we're videotaping tonight's program as a courtesy to Mary Jean and her family so that they get to see how we're able to represent these letters. But they truly are. The press will be covering this. They'll be coming here later on this summer, but we're very, very excited to have these. They are absolutely precious. She brought them when they were here. If you're familiar with how just the resources were so limited during the Civil War, many of the letters, particularly toward the end, were written diagonally in one direction and then crossway so they can get twice as much writing on each of the pieces of paper. And the glory of the story was that she had, their family was going to discard these letters, believe it or not, and she did come to the rescue of these very precious letters and again took the time during her life to transcribe them. So we are extremely grateful to her and look forward to that. So they will be on permanent display with the rest of our Civil War material. A little bit of setup, we're going to have a presentation. Obviously, we're not going to cover 10 years worth of letters. But as you saw from the program announcement, we're going to focus on the Battle of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, and most specifically that of the Battle of Fort Fisher. Lieutenant William Clemens is a native of Pottsville, a very, very storied service in the Civil War, working very closely in the Signal Corps with President Lincoln. And we are very fortunate this evening to have two actors portrayals. One is going to be portraying Lieutenant Clemens himself, and another one, his very good friend and commanding officer, Colonel Jacob Frick. But before I get to that, introduce our presenters this evening, I want to take a moment to thank several key people. First of all, Gene Dellock, who is a member of our board of directors, who is heading up our program committee. Gene, a big thanks for helping put together tonight's program. Another person I'd like to recognize is the Secretary of our Board of Directors, Ms. Joanne Chuba, who, if you want to take an appreciation of a real volunteer, Joanne wouldn't tell you this firsthand, but she has read every one of these letters.
Oh,
man. Yes, and through her hard work, she has distilled the elements of today's program. So again, Joanne, thank you very much. I think it qualifies you pretty much as a historian, as well as a curator and all the other things. So, it is a team effort to make these programs go on. I want to thank our board members who are here this evening and some of our volunteers, and thank you very much. Those of you who aren't members of the Society, we kindly ask if you would consider joining us. We can give you a membership application. It's not here. if you elect not to join, again, if you could be so nice as to make a contribution of $5 for tonight's program, we would be very grateful for that. Okay, one last other piece of exciting news, and then we'll get to tonight's program, and it is right in the theme of Civil War. Just this week, I received a text message, and it was kind of interesting. My phone beeps, and I see some text. It's a series of photos. And I'm looking at this and said, okay, I don't recognize the number, and I don't recognize the photos. It's a doll. I said, okay, maybe one of my friends is playing a joke. A few minutes later, the person writes, oh, I'm sorry, I should have sent you an explanation. We have a woman who's from New Jersey. Her 97-year-old mother wants to donate a Civil War era doll. It was her great-great-grandmother's, who was from here in Schuylkill County from 1851. So again, we're most excited to receive these types of gifts. That too will receive some media coverage, but those of you who are Civil War enthusiasts will really appreciate that. I think it's going to be a wonderful addition to our Civil War exhibit, as much as, if you've been there, most of the exhibit is military-oriented, but this really kind of brings a bit of the everyday life to that particular exhibit, so we're very fortunate, and so you'll be hearing more about that. So, this evening's program, I'd like to introduce, acting in the person of Colonel Jacob Frick, who was the commanding officer and good friend of Lieutenant Clemens. Colonel Frick was the commander of the 129th, the Northumberland County crew, and he will be portrayed by Mr. Stu Richards. And then joining him portraying none other than Lieutenant William Clemens will be Mr. Tommy Simons. And they will be having an exchange of some of the most interesting parts of the letters that we've written home. So if you please join me in welcoming our portrayers this evening.
I'd like to introduce you to the Historical Society here.
Good evening, folks.
This is a fine, well, he's not a young man anymore, but this is Mr. William Clemens. He served under me, how long ago was it?
40 years now.
40 years ago.
40 years.
Yeah, we're a little gray, we're a little rotund than what we were at that time, but
The years have been good to us.
have a seat here. I just wanted to talk a little bit here. I wanted to say a few things.
Jacob, why?
Well, this is a society meeting, a historical society meeting.
Well, I should be sitting back.
No. This is for, yeah, every time we have a guest of honor, we set them up front.
Well, who's sitting here?
You. So sit down.
Thank you, Jacob.
You know, I'm still your commanding officer over those years. Yeah,
You're right.
Anyway, William, what can we say about William? But first I have to say something. One of our members here, Miss Joanne Juba, there she is. Stand up, please, Joanne. She had a fortunate thing happen to her and to this society. Do you know your great niece, Mary Ellen Helms?
Well, it's going back years.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, what her father did, or your father did, was gave her all your letters.
What letters?
From the war. From the Civil War.
The ones that
The Great War. The only war. Yes, that you wrote to your father and your sister Tilly.
And they saved them.
Yes. Well, what we're going to do tonight, and thanks to Joanne from the society who kept them and has them stored now here in our safe, because they are a valuable archive of history.
Thank you.
But what I want you to do tonight, a little bit more than that, is I want you to read some of those letters that you wrote.
To read?
Read and see if you can recall. Now,
Read what I wrote 40 years ago.
yes, sir.
That would
Now,
be a fine thing indeed.
you started with the First Offenders.
Yes.
He was a member of the First Offenders, our great units from Schuylkill County that went off to fight on April 18th when those dastardly,
And our
Traitors.
first service was in Baltimore.
that's right, when old Nick Biddle got whacked in the head with that rock.
I believe it was a 2x4 8 brick.
Okay.
I still have it.
He was a member of the First Offenders. He then served with the 25th Regiment for a bit, back down there in Washington area. And then at the call of Abraham Lincoln for another, I can't remember those numbers anymore, the 35,000 more troops, we formed a 9-month regiment called the 129th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. I was appointed commander. I initially was with the 96th Pennsylvania from Pottsville, but I had a little falling out with Colonel Cake, if you remember. Colonel Cake,
Minor
myself.
disagreement, if I remember, Jake.
It was a little bit more than a minor one. So I resigned from the 96th and was asked to form the 129th Regiment.
Finest bunch of fighting men in Schuylkill County I've ever seen.
For 9 months, we fought in 2 of the worst battles that you could ever fight in during the Civil War. The Battle of Fredericksburg and the Battle of Chancellorsville. At the Battle of Fredericksburg, William lost one of his closest friends at that time, Captain Lawrence, who you were serving under at that time.
Yes. George was a fine man.
You
Fine man.
had him, if I can recall right, you assigned one of your men to help carry his body off the field. It was very upsetting to you in that context, but yet you continued on, and I made him commanding officer of Company A. And he served in that capacity for a while. Then, after 9 months, we, the 129th, folded up. I was not cashiered, but I was charged with a charge, but I didn't have my men buy frock coats. That's another story, but we don't even want to talk about that. Tonight is for Major William Clemens. He's a Pottsville native. Because as I said before, he was with the 25th Pennsylvania Infantry. And Joanne, thank you very much for these notes here, because I can't remember everything about this guy, this fellow. I only know him by his face. And when you said you had these letters, and she called me on the thing and told me to read the letters, I said, why should I read the letters when I know Will himself? I'll bring Will here and let him read his own letters, which is...
So that's what this is all about.
Yes, sir.
You always had a way about doing things like that. Always had a way of making the end meet the means.
I believe the curator showed you the letters. Did you see copy, the volume of all the letters that he... Look, this is all that you wrote to your father, your sister, and your father, some of them, not many, and your sister back to you.
Well, at times it was tough to make a note here and there.
That it was. Major Clemens is famous for many, many things, but it's post our friendship that you became one of the leading men, officers, patriots of the Civil War. Major Clemens was appointed Chief Signal Officer in the United States Army. And what we're going to talk about tonight is the Battle of Fort Fisher. I'm sure you remember that.
So many years ago.
He was commended for valor, for his competence in receiving signals. He was directly under Admiral David Porter. We all know who David Porter was, the famous Union admiral. Admiral Porter, as a mark of esteem and regard, invited Clemens to accompany him with President Lincoln on a trip up the James River to the capital of the Confederacy, where they occupied the mansion of Jefferson Davis. I'm sure you remember that.
I remember it well. I remember that day well.
So without further ado, there they are. I would be pleased, and I'm sure everybody here would be pleased to hear what you wrote during the war back home. Because I went over these letters and I found them the most interesting that I've ever seen anywhere in this area.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you very much, my friend.
Take a look, reminisce, talk about it, and see how you feel.
You know, this ought to be quite interesting to see what what I wrote as a young man many, many years ago, and what my thoughts were, and how ideas may have changed. If you don't mind, please bear with me. Flagship Malvern. Yes, I remember that. Off the coast of North Carolina. 23 December 1864. Dear Father, I write you but a line now merrily to let you know where I am. I have no time to write much as the steamer is now ready to go north. Mail was brought this morning, but there were no letters for this vessel, as our mail is now on the way by another steamer. I received your letter the 15th, a few days since, and was delighted to hear from home. Always good to get mail from home. I had supposed that long ere this would have engaged the rebel batteries, but the very rough weather has prevented all movement on our part thus far. We now have been lying off the coast for over a week, tossing and bumping and pitching about without mercy offshore. We've had extremely heavy seas, and has been nothing but toss and roll from morning till night, from night till morning. I have been a portion of the time in bed, not seasick, but fearful. At least I would be high up, remaining up. Some nights it would be impossible to keep in our bunks any way we could. On more than one occasion, everything on the dinner table was pitched on the floor while we went flying in all directions. Happy time of it. I suppose we'll soon go in and attack the batteries as there are indications of better weather. We expect to run in today and take a look at their fortifications. Christmas is near at hand and we hardly know it's here. I suppose the children are all on tiptoe and anxiously awaiting its arrival. Enclosed, please find $10 for the boys. I would send more, but I think I had better defer it until another time. Excuse this, and I will write you first opportunity a long letter, give you full particulars of our whole trip. With much love to Mother, Tilly, and all at home, I am your affectionate son, Will. P.S. Don't neglect to write often. I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a happy time. It is very probable that on Christmas Day we will be engaging the enemy, as it looks so at the present.
Let me state something for you people if you're not familiar with the Battle of Fort Fisher. There were two distinct battles of this place. This is in North Carolina, and we are taken, this is 1864 coming into 1865, near the end of the war. We have sent troops down there and we are blockading Wilmington, North Carolina, which is one of the most important places where the damn rebels would bring their ships in with supplies from England. What we have here, what Major Clemens at this time was in the Signal Corps. He is still a soldier, but he's on board a ship. And I think that's why he was talking about rolling and seasick. Were you sick?
Yeah, never. Stomach was queasy at times, but I was never sick. Never admit defeat. You should know that, right?
And the Malvern, the ship that he was on, was the fleet, the admiral ship.
Flagship.
Yeah, the flagship.
Flagship of the fleet. There's another one from the Malvern, if you don't mind. Christmas Eve, the next night. Flagship Malvern, in front of the batteries near Wilmington, North Carolina, 24 December 1864. Dear Father, a steamer is just about leaving for Beaufort for ammunition, and I thought I would write you a line. We have not been engaging the enemy all day and have had a hot time. But up to the present, which is 5 p.m., we have not accomplished much, although we have silenced their batteries a great part of the day. We are now retiring and will renew the fight in the morning. I have been in the hottest parts and have escaped thus far. Our losses are very slight, but 3 rifle pieces did burst on Butler. It's not here with his forces. He's haven't gone back to Beaufort. All think if he had been here, we would have accomplished more, as it's highly necessary to have land forces to cooperate with us. We are all hopeful and we are confident of success. The weather and sea were all that could be desired by us for the attack. Christmas Eve, and I suppose the visions of sugar plums are dancing in the heads of the youngsters. I wish you all a merry and a happy Christmas, right soon and often. More later, love to all, your affectionate son, Will. Christmas Eve.
Always the one for reminiscing about home.
Well, that's what keeps you going, Jacob, with the memories.
That's true.
In the darkest times, you always think of mother and father and Tilly, the friends back home. Unfortunately, friends that we lost along the way. Petersburg still burns. Let's move a few days forward. This one might be quite lengthy. I must have had some time on my hands here. Let us see. So many years ago. The flagship Malvern off New Inlet, North Carolina. 27 December 1864. My dear father, a mail leaves here tomorrow for the North, and I write now in order to have it ready in time. I would like to write you a long letter now, giving you a detailed description of all our movements, from the time of our leaving Fort Monroe up to the present, which includes our attacks upon the defenses of Wilmington, North Carolina. But there is such a heavy swell on, and the vessel is rolling so badly that it's almost impossible to write at all, without saying anything about writing with comfort. If you have ever been on a vessel during a heavy sea running, you can readily imagine the difficulties one has to contend with, and readily perceive how unpleasant it is to attempt anything like writing. I wrote you a couple of letters lately, the last this evening after the first day's fight, which letters I suppose you have received there already. Well, as you're already aware, we, that is, the Navy, have attacked the forts and have done all that could be expected of us. But when I attempt to speak of success, I hardly know what to say. You are well aware that it is not supposed by anyone that these works could be reduced by the Navy alone, but that it was necessary to have a sufficient land force to operate with us, and without which troops being furnished, we were kept so long in Hampton Roads. On the 13th, we sailed from the Roads, and troops under Butler having proceeded up and came to anchorage off Frying Pan Shoals, our fleet put into Beaufort, where we remained until the morning of the 17th, when we again put to sea and joined the whole fleet in North Carolina that same afternoon. Well, let's go back.
Does it bring back?
Just thinking about trying to write these letters at times. You'd have your pen, you'd be on the table, you might go. Try to put some of the sand on there to block the ink in it. It's my penmanship, as you can well tell, it's not the greatest. But it's, I don't believe it was from myself. They're good teachers. The sea had much to do with it.
Said by the gentleman.
Let me go ahead a little bit there. On the morning of the 24th Saturday, all hands were underway, and at 10 o'clock, as fine a fleet as ever was collected in the history of the world, steamed in to attack the forts, which seemed to bid defiance to anything. The vessels came up in a magnificent order, their positions assigned, and in their different lines, and no one who did not see it can imagine what a truly beautiful sight it was. The Minnesota, one of the magnificent vessels in the world, with her broadsides of 24 9-inch guns each, led the line and soon took the position assigned her about 1¼ miles from the fort. The Colorado and the Wabash, oh, it's coming back to me now, Jacob. Colorado and the Wabash, sister ships to the Minnesota, and her equals led the other lines. Then came the double-enders, side-wheeler gunboats of all descriptions and sizes, with the Ironsides and the Monitors in advance. Upon arriving at about 2 miles distant from the fort, the fleet stopped, and the new Ironsides, followed by the Monitors, Monadnock, Mahopac, and Conesus, steamed on slowly to take positions close under the fort and opening action. All stood with breathless anxiety as these vessels steamed steadily forward, and the decks of all the vessels were crowded with the crew as they witnessed the slow but sure advance of the ironclads. Who will fire the first shot? Some said the fort, others said our boats. Thus impatient did we waited until after 12 when the Ironsides commenced work by firing one of our 11-inch guns, which was immediately followed by the monitors. Signal was immediately made for the whole fleet to take their positions, which was done as soon as possible. In less than an hour, our vessels were pouring a perfect torrent of shells into the fort. Our fire was so severe that it prevented the enemy from doing us much damage and silenced their batteries a portion of the day. During all the fighting, we and this frail vessel were everywhere amongst the different vessels, and it made no difference to the admiral whether the shells were flying or not. We were as close to the enemy's works as any of the ships, except the monitors. And although the shells flew in every direction, all around us we were struck but once, and did that no damage. Our fire was terrific, but it did not meet with as vigorous a reply as we had anticipated, and I cannot understand why the enemy did not use their guns more than they did, and can only account for it. But our fire was too severe. During the afternoon, our shells created a very heavy fire in the fort, which we supposed was the barracks. At nightfall, we withdrew, as I write you last, to renew again in the morning, after expending about 13,000 shells, none less than 7-inch. And without accomplishing what was expected, I do believe that had the troops been there and landed, that they could have taken the fort by assault. Our casualties are slight indeed, very few being killed and wounded. 100 will cover all the loss of the first day. The Colorado was struck 20 times, and all the vessels more or less, and it was strange indeed that there was so few casualties. Christmas Eve, just after the fight boat returned from Beaufort, with his forces ready to land in the morning. Christmas morning. Christmas morning came upon us the most lovely day imaginable. The sea, still as a mill pond, without but a slight breeze blowing, and as soft and warm as in the summer. Nothing better could be desired, and no one doubted that ere night would close upon us, that the fort would be in our possession. Christmas morning, we were again ready for the fight. When I got up, I could not help turn my thoughts homeward and think of the children. Happy in the fact that it was Christmas, and I easily could imagine their feelings upon discovering what St. Nicholas may have done for them during the night, trivial as it may have been. I say I could not help but think of home, and an involuntary wish would arise that I might be permitted to be there and enjoy the day with them. That's part of me, Jake. It was just,
Well, let me tell you, Will. I don't know anybody that's sitting here that couldn't have been sitting at home while your father was reading these letters and not have their heart pounding at the visions that would be in your head of someone writing a letter. No picture, no photograph,
just memories.
just memories. But the way you wrote brought that all to reality.
Let us continue. We were early underway, and before 11 o'clock had again engaged the enemy. The vessels occupying the same positions as upon the day before. The firing was kept up all day with more disastrous effect upon the rebels than on the 24th, as our firing was superior and fewer shots were wasted. Again, the fort was in flames, and from the extent we were led to believe that there was great destruction going on. Butler, in the meantime, had commenced landing his troops about 2.5 miles, but when night came, 1/2 of his forces or more had not been landed. Why he did not make more progress, we could not understand. The few troops which landed advanced down the beach, and some more daring went close to the fort. And one man captured a rebel flag, and another a horse, and both came back on the beach with their trophies. Troops upon landing also captured a large number of rebel soldiers who were on duty there. Our fire as night approached was, as possible, more terrific than on the day before, and we were anxiously awaiting the advance of the troops, but there was none. At nightfall, we again withdrew, only to hear the astounding news from Butler that he intended to re-embark his troops, as he had heard that the large forces were coming down from Wilmington. We were all astounded and dumbfounded, and could hardly realize that he really intended to do so, as our fleet could keep off any number of men the enemy could send. However, he did commence to re-embark his troops, and when Monday morning came, he had but a small portion of them off, as the sea had commenced running pretty heavy, and it was impossible to get boats to them. Butler left in his ship for Fort Monroe yesterday, with his troops still ashore. They had taken but a small amount of rations with them, and here they were lying on the beach, and we were unable to get them off or get to them. Last night they commenced to re-embark them, and by noon today we got them all off. And Butler and his army is now on the high seas en route to Fort Monroe. I have given you a very plain, unvarnished statement of all the affairs. If we're here, we can not assign any reason for Butler's conduct. Then how can you at home be expected to do so too? These are the facts, and you can draw your own conclusions from them. We received the mail today from the north, and I received letters from Pottsville of the 18th date and the Journal of the 17th, but no letter from you, Father, in which I was somewhat disappointed. But I suppose I will get one in a few days. Well, I have written much more than I intended. Considering the constant motion of this vessel, it is rather a matter of wonder to myself that I have done so much. With much love to Mother, Tilly, all the boys, and with the hope that I will soon hear from you, I am your affectionate son, Will. Remember me to Eliza and all her friends.
Now, who was Liza?
Just say acquaintance back home. Friend of the family.
Friend of the family. I remember old Ben Butler.
Yes.
I don't think there was a soul in the army who liked that man. He had the head of the size of a mushroom, if I remember.
It was almost as popular as Burnside.
Yeah.
May I continue?
Sure. We sit in anticipation.
I can't believe it's 40 years gone by. And I can't believe that the letters were kept. I feel bad now with Father long gone and how I chided him to write more. Almost scolded him. I hope he wasn't disappointed with me.
Oh, I'm sure your father knew what a soldier's life meant.
And then to
We're
save
so
these
old.
letters, that's amazing.
You are very fortunate.
Well, let's start off the new year with the first letter of the new year. Beaufort, North Carolina, 1st of January, 1865. In fact, I had written 1864 and crossed it out and made a 5 out of it. Dear Father, we are again at this place where we arrived a few days since. The attack upon Wilmington having been abandoned for a short time. Butler, as I wrote you, having left us with the troops. I suppose you have received, long ere this, my letter written to you after the second day's attack, in which I gave you all the particulars. It is indeed a great pity that after so much preparation by the Navy, and when all ahead looked so bright, it should have been terminated as it did. But I cannot help against saying that if Admiral Porter had been supported, as he had every reason to expect he would, the result would have been much different. There can be no doubt of the fact that the terrific fire of our gunboats completely silenced the enemy and drove them from their guns, forcing them to seek shelter in their bomb-proofs and forbidding them even to wish the entrance of 2 or 3 of our daring soldiers who not only went into the fort under our own fire, captured a horse, a fly, and killed an orderly bearing dispatches, but even went up to the bomb-proof in which some of the enemy had concealed themselves, opened the door, and fired their muskets in amongst the rebels. Now, if a couple of men could obtain almost absolute possession of a fort, deemed by Butler impregnable, is it not natural to suppose that 5,000 men could have captured it? As I said before, it does appear mysterious, and you can form your own conclusions in the matter. I enclose herewith a copy of Butler's letter to the Admiral, in which he notifies him of the fact that he intends re-embarking his troops and his reasons therefor. The Admiral replied to this letter, but I have no copy at present. But I think it's published in the Herald, with the whole of the Admiral's report to the Department. The Admiral told Butler in it that it was a pity there was not a few more brave men to follow those who entered the fort. All here seem to think that the feelings and spirit which animated so many of our political generals at the beginning of this war, where country is a secondary consideration to personal aggravation, and not a little to do with the circumstances in this case, and you may depend upon it that many a prayer has gone up for an infliction of punishment on him who deserves to be treated in the manner prescribed in the Articles of War in relation to deserters. Very stern about treatment.
Still a lot of references to Butler. You know, remember when he was in charge of New Orleans? And the women threw chamber pots out the window at him?
Yes.
That tells you how much we like Ben Butler.
Yeah. You know, it was a different time 40 years ago, too. I mean, patriotism was so rapid in the country, and people rushing off to war, but many seem to achieve rank awful quickly through, dare I say, political favoritism. I don't think this country will continue like that, though. However, the affair has only begun, and it is very probable that before 1 week has rolled away, another attack will have been made upon Fort Fisher. The troops are being prepared for this attack, and we expect them here in a day or two. An officer arrived here today from Lieutenant General Grant with dispatches and the information that General Grant is fully aware of the course pursued by Butler, and that he is determined to show the people that this thing can be accomplished. The greater part of the fleet is here, and they have all been ordered to be ready for sea at any moment. I do not suppose we will get off for 3 or 4 days yet, but no one can tell, maybe sooner or later. Our mail communications now is rather irregular, but we are expecting one hourly. The latest letter I have had from you is on the 16th. I suppose you have written since, but I have received nothing further from you. I am exceedingly anxious to hear again from home. I am in the enjoyment of good health, but I must admit that at times I get rather tired of this kind of life, as it is a great degree monotonous. But then it would be about the same as if I was more comfortably located. Well, sir, I go ashore pretty often, though there's nothing to be seen, for it is the most forlorn place imaginable. A few rickety frame houses built on a sand heap, while a few people seen here are of that low class of North Carolina snuff dippers, the sight of whom suggests a query as to whether we are not in some foreign port, as they look certainly unlike Americans. The weather the past day or two has been cold and very suggestive of winter, although we can hardly realize that winter is really here, as we have had the most delightful weather, except the occasional blow when we're out at sea. Do not make much exposition of this letter, as there's no doubt there are some fools who might take exceptions to the remarks made in reference to Butler, but I have never yet heard, since I've been in the service, one officer or one man who said one word in favor of him as a soldier. But whether he is or not, there is one thing very certain: he is the man who wields a powerful influence, a stronger one than any general in the service, and a man who does not hesitate to assert his rights and inflict a blow when he chooses. In that long run, it is better for an officer, no matter his rank, to defer as little with him as possible. You know, there are some who idolize him, and what I say of him would stamp me in their estimation as one unfit for his position. But what I say is only the echo of thousands. Be careful to whom you show this, but I have given you only facts. I shall not close this letter tonight, but shall wait till morning, as it's possible that before that time a mail may arrive with a letter from you, with which I hope will be the case. I send much love to Mother, Tilly, and all the boys, and only wish that I could pay you another visit. Oh, by the by, I forgot to mention that we have again started on a new year, which fact I suppose you're aware, 1865 to think of it. I hope this year may bring peace with it, for indeed I am getting tired of war and wish for a return to civil life. Do not neglect to write often to me. I am your affectionate son, Will. January 2nd, mail has arrived, but I received no letter. Journal of the 24th King. I'm sorry I received no letter. Happy New Year.
You really wished for letters, didn't you?
Yes, well, any soldier, you know that, Jacob, but it takes your mind off the atrocities of war and the troubles. And even in camp, when we were training, with the daily monotonous of drill and order back and forth, a mail call would come around and sit at the post, and we'd sit there and read about mother and father and their sisters and what was going on in the old hometown. Kind of made the bad times go away. Any soldier could attest to that. Thought I read another.
I think we can have time for another. Do you? Read that one of the 18th.
January 18th, right?
Yes.
Flagship Malvern, Cape Fear River, North Carolina, 18 January, 1865. My dear Father, I wrote you hastily on the night of the 15th whilst the fighting was in progress at Fort Fisher. And although I might have waited and told you in the same letter that we were victorious, yet I was uncertain how soon the mail would leave. And I, being very busy, was compelled to write and close very hastily in order to get it off in time for the mail, which would have leave sometime during the night. You are, of course, fully aware, long ere this, of the operations here, and have no doubt read all the graphic descriptions given by the more able correspondents of the press. But were it not that this comes from one in which you have some interest, and one who has been a participant, I would not think you would find much interest in reading this. I would like to give you such a description of the attacks, the assaults, the bombardment, and the final surrender of the works as they occurred, as they are pictured now before me. But my pen fails me, and I am unable to find words to express it in such a way as would seem satisfactory to myself. Whatever may have been the joy at the North upon the reception of the news, it must certainly have been far inferior to that manifested by us, who, after the long day's work, doubtful and fearful at times, lest we might fail, found that our labor had repaid itself, and that we had accomplished one of, if not, the greatest victories of the war. The capture of the fort itself was not the victory alone, but it proved to the world that we were able to do the task, and has shown that too often have the lives of thousands of brave fellows been placed in incompetent hands, and that when men able to perform the duties of that position are entrusted with the work, they can perform it satisfactorily. And how could the President act more wisely than when he issued the order for the removal of General Butler, prompted not only by his conduct during the first attacks upon this place, but also as it alleged for the acts not altogether consistent with his position as a Major General. Now that Fort Fisher is taken, and taken without laying siege to it, as according to the opinion of that wise engineer, General Weitzel, must be done before we can obtain possession. I think the people should, by this time, be convinced that such men as General Butler will never conquer the enemy, but, on the other hand, will only prolong the war and exhaust every resource of the government, and the sooner, so the President thinks, that such men are relieved from the important commands, the better it is for the country. Any general with a sufficient number of men and possessing a strong determination and courage, which urges him to go in and win, finds in Admiral Porter a man ready and able to assist him. And when General Terry arrived at Beaufort with his troops, the most cordial and hearty feelings were manifested between the two commanders, and each seemed to strive to outdo the other in rendering every assistance possible. It is with this feeling and with an entire satisfaction pervading every officer in the fleet that we left Beaufort en route for this place. As I said in my last letters home, that we were favored with the most delightful weather, and from the start, everything forebode success. And when arriving in sight of Fort Fisher, all looked upon it as a doomed spot. Although the enemy boasted that it would be impossible for us to dislodge them, and even said in their papers that they did not know who was the bigger fool, Porter or Butler, for making the attempt, but I suppose at least by this time they are satisfied that Admiral Porter is not. I said in the beginning of this that we consider it one of the greatest and most important victories of the war, and anyone thinking carefully over the matter will soon find it to be the fact. It was through this channel the enemy had been receiving all the necessities for carrying on this war. And it is the channel through which she has had communication with the outer world. To prevent the possibility of our obtaining possession of this river and outlet, the enemy built the strongest earthworks in the world, placing an officer, Major General Whiting, who before the war was one of the finest engineers in our army, in command, and leading him here ever since the war began, in order that he, with his superior knowledge, would be able to hold the point open for them as long as the war may exist. For over 3 years, General Whiting has been building and strengthening these works, which in 2 days were taken from them by Cherry and Porter. As I said, Fort Fisher is one of the most magnificent earthworks, as well as the strongest that all here have seen, mounting over many guns of the largest caliber, and protected by traverses which are mountains themselves. Besides Fisher, on the extreme southeastern point of the peninsula and adjoining the fort is Bat Land, or the Mound as it was called, which is an immense pile of earth, sand, sod, 60 foot in height, and on which were placed 2 heavy 11-inch Blakely guns. The Mound was always a terror to our blockades, and whilst commanding the entrance to the river and the sea in all directions, it at the same time can be used upon any assaulting party advancing upon Fisher. Remember now, behind the mound and about 1,200 yards distant is Fort Buchanan, named after Admiral B of Mobile fame. Also a most magnificent work, although not so high as the mound, and mounting 3 immense guns, 2 pointing out to sea and across the river, and 1 which can be used upon Fort Fisher. And this gun, as well as those upon the mound, proved very destructive and caused a great deal of trouble to our forces during the attack upon the fort. We landed artillery that day, and the troops entrenched themselves in order to have a position to fall back upon in case they were repulsed. Bright and early Sunday morning, which by the way was a most lovely morning, the fleet was again underway and steaming in towards Fort Fisher. And at 10 o'clock, throwing a perfect torrent of shells, which kept the enemy covered in their bomb-proofs and prevented them from using their guns a greater part of the time, and I do not wonder at it. But I can hardly conceive it possible for any human being to have the courage to stand by those guns while our firing was at its heaviest. At the same time, the fleet was about to commence the action with the sailors, Marines, officers, all volunteers. They began to disembark in small boats from their different vessels and to collect and organize upon the beach, preparatory to taking part in the assault, which was to come off at 2 o'clock p.m. In the meantime, General Terry was getting his troops in position in front of the northeast face with the most intense anxiety that we waited for the appointed time. Before leaving Beaufort, he arranged a system of signals by which a motion implied a whole sentence, and thus in an instant all information was conveyed. At 2 o'clock, the hour appointed, the general was not ready. We waited patiently for him. 1 hour passed, and at 3 p.m. precisely the message came. My preparations for the assault are made, and my troops are in position. And the whole fleet was notified of the part it had to perform. 3:15 the message came. Change your direction of your fire, which was the information that his troops were at that moment advancing. The man stationed at that steam whistle that our vessel started, and the next moment, as it were, one vessel after another took it up, and the roar of artillery, which had been incessant during the whole day, ceased, and the din of steam whistles was substituted.
And this was all because you took all these messages and you sent all these messages.
That wasn't just me, it was,
No, sir, it was you.
you don't forget there's people on the other side sending the messages. And that was very smart of General Terry to be able to condense sentences into 1 or 2 words so that when he signaled, you could do everything more precise and more exact, and everything right, everything was pinpoint accuracy. He was a brilliant man, he was. The sailors and Marines changed the sea face, started down the beach, they were in full view. As they were but a few short distance from us, we could distinctly see the movements of all of them. They advanced in full sun with cheers, never having been organized in so large a numbers, nearly 2,000. Not that by steady onward march of a disciplined soldier, but as I say, they ran towards the fort, more as it was like a rabble, with their officers leading them on. From the start, they became disorganized, and the enemy, by this time, had mounted the parapets of the fort, opened a terrific fire of musketry upon them, and in an instant, many a poor Jack tar and many a gallant naval officer fell on the beach, either killed or wounded. They still pushed forward, but it's for a short distance, for they immediately began to retrace their steps through this withering fire which the enemy kept pouring upon them from the tops of the parapets. For knowing that sailors were not firing at them, they with impunity load and fire deliberately. At this time, our spirits began to droop. But we were not yet aware of the progress of the soldiers or what had been able to accomplish. But directly a shout arose on the ship that the soldiers had gained the first parapet and were fighting their way, inch by inch. Directly we saw them across the first and gained the second, and then they fought over traverse after traverse until when night fell, they had gained 8 of them, and were in reality fighting the rebels in the fort, each party holding possession of one half. After the repulse of the sailors, our ships again opened up upon the sea, and Bat Buchanan, over which reinforcements were coming to the relief of those in the fort. Fighting was most desperate. The two forces were at times almost touching each other, but our troops did not give 1 inch. They kept steadily gaining upon the enemy, fighting on through the darkness. The shells from the gunboats fell at times almost among our own men. That was just unavoidable in the darkness. However, we did not injure many, and the fire was soon changed. At 8 o'clock, I received a message from the general that he had a fresh brigade drawn up and expected to finish the job with them. All this time, the men were fighting hard and steadily, gaining upon the rebels, but the greatest fear was that the enemy would get certain reinforcements, which would end landing, and a heavy fire was kept up by the gunboats in that direction to prevent them reaching the fort. At 9:30, a tremendous cheer arose from the fort, and the musketry ceased when we knew the fort was ours. Presently the message came from the general. "Cease fire! We have possession." It's going to get goosebumps. I think about that, Jacob.
You received that message from the general. Cease fire. The fort is ours.
We have possession. Immediately, every man aboard was assembled on the quarterdeck, and amidst the glare of rockets shooting in every direction and Costa lights burning on all sides, the welcome rang with the cheers of the officers and men. Signal was made to all the fleet, and for an hour the air was filled with rockets and fireworks, while it rang with the cheers of the men. The ringing of the bells and the whistling of the steamers, joy was unconfined. The sight I witnessed that night I shall never forget. The old tars fairly cried with joy and threw up their tarps, and only withdrew in anxiety to know whom we had lost. The losses on both sides were heavy, but the sailors suffered the worst, considering the time that they were under fire. We lost many valuable officers, 2 from this ship, and 2 of the fine young men I ever met, Lieutenants Preston and Porter. No relation to the Admiral now. Both of our mess was killed in the first advance. After we had possession of the fort, we sent a boat over to the beach. They were found where they had fallen. And at midnight, we had their bodies on board. They were carefully prepared and sent north next day. Lieutenant Preston was one of the most talented gentlemen in the Navy. And besides the loss to his own family, the country has lost a man whom it is hard to replace. Poor Preston and Porter. The ship seems deserted without them. Then mentioned earlier, there's sad times. Is it good to read these letters and bring back some memories like that?
Well, it was fantastic. We really appreciate that you brought that back to us. And in that context, because I can see the emotion that you have right now, just reading over them again after all those years. Let me ask you something, though.
Yes, my friend.
You met President Lincoln
Yes.
as a first offender.
Yes.
He shook your hand.
When we left Pottsville, went to Camp Curtin in Harrisburg, and we boarded trains for Baltimore, and we talked about earlier. We tried to make our way through the city to Camden Yards, and we got to the Capitol. We billeted in the Capitol that night, and the President came over to greet us and thanked us for our service to the country. The very first to respond for his call for troops, and shook hands with everyone there.
And then you met him once again with Admiral Porter a month before his death. Was there a difference in the Great Father's look?
He aged as everyone does at war. War is not easy on a man. And he still had his high spirits, but you could tell it took his wear and tear on him.
I have one more thing to read for you. Excuse me. For these citizens to understand the value that you have brought forth to this country and to this. Two things we have here. And I'm proud to read this as a friend. Congress gave you a vote to thanks, and Rear Admiral Porter acknowledged your bravery, which you so humbly denied. Congress honored Major Clemens with a vote of thanks for his bravery, and he was appointed by the Secretary of War second lieutenant and was stationed in San Antonio, Texas, in the regular Army. It's a shame they had to go from a major of volunteers to a second lieutenant of regular Army, but that's the way our Army works at this time. You had charge of all government stores and was subsequently promoted first lieutenant of the 31st Infantry at Fort Garland, Colorado. From there, you were transferred to the 50th Infantry, and served until your resignation in 1870 when you went to work for the Coal and Iron Company back here in Schuylkill County. What a wonderful, extreme, wonderful career you served this country.
Well, I only did what anyone from Schuylkill County has done the same. You know that.
You became a manager of the financial department of the Coal and Iron Company about 1880, and then became a bookkeeper for the Lehigh Valley Coal Company. You resigned this position not too long ago in 1891, owing to not feeling well. I'm sure it was from all those times in the military, damp nights, cold mornings.
We all endure that, though. Okay, you know that.
And then, one of the most interesting and wonderful things that I've ever seen a soldier attain was this. Major Clemens Award. North Atlantic Squadron, USS Flagship Malvern, off Fort Fisher, January 17, 1865. Sir, Second Lieutenant W.W. Clemens, U.S. Signal Corps, was detailed at my request for a signal officer by the Chief of that Corps to serve as signal officer on my staff. Mr. Clemens has taught the Army code to at least one of the regular officers on board each ship that we had with us, which was enabled me often to communicate when naval signals would have been of no avail. You taught all men on board all that flags, all the ships in that squadron, the code. Amazing. In addition, his services have been to me of the utmost importance, thoroughly collected and competent at all times and under any circumstances, genuinely in his department, intelligent, always ready and cheerful. I hope you will at least send a copy of this to the Honorable Secretary of War, that it may be placed on file as a slight evidence of my appreciation of him as an officer and a gentleman. Though Mr. Clemens, I was in constant communication with General Terry, even during the assault on Fort Fisher, and was enabled to direct the fire of the new Ironsides to the traverse occupied by the enemy without fear of hurting our own people from my complete reliance upon him. I have the honor to be very respectfully your obedient servant, David D. Porter, Rear Admiral. Honorable Gideon Wells, Secretary of the Navy, also signed it. So thank you, William, for coming here tonight and being with us. I'm sure these citizens, patriots, feel the same that I feel. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jacob. You yourself, a Medal of Honor winner in the War of Rebellion. Thank you also for your
And thank you for being my friend.
You're fine.
And thank you for coming.
I don't think there's any of us who ever thought as a child or perhaps as an adult, I know I've had this experience in my short time here at the Historical Society, if I could only travel back in time. I just want you to stop for just a moment and just take in what you saw this evening about a fellow citizen of Schuylkill County, seated here in this building, in this room, that was built nearly simultaneously as to when these events were happening. 1865, 1864, the building of this wonderful building we're today. And bring it all together. Major Clemens, his service, the first responders of Schuylkill County, and everything they did. Our world has not changed. We're still at war on many fronts. But when you hear it brought home through the voice, through the letters, the exquisite letters, the writing, it's incomparable to any author of anyone I think any of us have ever read. But having them presented to us this evening first person by these gentlemen is extremely, in my pleasure, in my opinion, a true pleasure and honor. So join me in thanking both Stu and Tom. Fantastic.
Being married girl back home.
You have to read the rest of the letter.
Tune in next week at the same time.
What Tom had said is the
But
best
Joanne,
thing.
she read all the letters, didn't he? There was a mention of that in his letters?
Never know. You never know.
You never know.
He died not too long after this, in 19, what was it? But I'm telling you what, you can't sit back and not read these letters. I mean, every one, it's so prolific, everything he wrote. I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds of letters from Civil War soldiers. And you have to half the time interpret what they're talking about to begin with, but his is such clarity and such the vision you get from what he's writing.
It felt very much like you were there. And while the recording's still on, I want to offer a sincere thank on behalf of the Board of Directors, our President Jay Zane, and all the members of the Schuylkill County Historical Society. A very heartfelt thank you to the family for gifting us these wonderful Schuylkill County treasures. Thank you.
He died June 2nd, 1894 at the home of his mother in Pottsville. Major Clemens was a brave soldier and won high recognition for his service for his country. Major Clemens was born and raised in Pottsville. He was 56 years of age at the time of his death. His father was one of the early settlers of Pottsville. William attended all the Pottsville schools and was a graduate of the Westchester Academy. Major Clemens, who at the time of the Civil War was living in Minersville, and joined the Washington Artillerists as a private and marched with them to the First Defenders. They were the elite guys of the First Defenders.
Schuylkill County's best. Again, on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, if you're not a member, we're always appreciative of your support. If you feel compelled to do so, we ask that you make a small donation for tonight's program. And again, let's give one last round of applause for Tom.